This is Tara. Welcome to Sky Gazing. Today we're studying Sutra number 18. Virāma-pratyaya-abhyāsa-pūrvaḥ saṃskāra-śeṣaḥ anyaḥ. Virāma means cessation or stopping. Pratyaya is the content of the mind. In other contexts it can mean cause. Abhyasa is practice. Purva is that which has come before. Samskara is tendencies or impressions, and Sesha is the remaining. Anyaḥ is the other. What he referring to is the other Samadhi. So in Maharishi Ved Vyasa's bhashya, it's translated as preceded by the repetition of the notion of cessation is the other, in which only residual potencies remain. Now this is a connection to the previous sutra in which he has explained the lower Samadhi as we are calling it. So now he is explaining the other Samadhi. There is some dispute among scholars over whether he is referring to the Nirbija Samadhi or the Asamprajñata Samadhi. So different, as we go ahead, it's very important to note that different gurus explain it differently. And in this one, almost all of them disagree with each other. So what are the means and nature of the ultra-cognitive trance, which is Asamprajñata Samadhi? He says that is a state of mental restraint in which all modification ceases from action and remains only in pause. It is the higher desirelessness. So he says any form of practice having an objective phenomenon cannot become the means of achieving it. What does that mean? That if I'm viewing a symbol, if I'm chanting a mantra, I'm using the senses. So therefore I cannot attain Samadhi by using these means I cannot use the sense to overcome the sense. Correct? By the constant repetition of the notion, the mind has no object to grasp, it becomes non-existent. So when are you able to seize the mind? When the mind has no object to grasp, and when that is a repeated state of being, then the mind ceases to exist. This is Nirbija Samadhi without seed and ultra cognitive. So this is Maharishi Ved Vyasa's thing where he is saying this is Nirbija Samadhi. However, Swami Satyananda disagrees. He says the other Samadhi, Asamprajñata, is preceded by a continued study of stopping the content of the mind. In it, the mind remains in the form of traces. So he says there's a misconception about this kind of Samadhi. He says every depth of Samprajñata Samadhi is intermixed with a state of Asamprajñata Samadhi. And that Asamprajñata is not Nirbija Samadhi. Asamprajñata, he says, belongs to Sabija Samadhi, that which has seed. Nirbija is the highest Samadhi, and therefore both Samprajñata and Asamprajñata are Sabija. So both the lower Samadhi and the higher Samadhi are Sabija, and then the highest form of Samadhi is Nirbija. So he says when the spiritual aspirant departs from dhyana and enters Samadhi, that is Vitarka Samprajñata. If perfected, it will be followed by Asamprajñata. The next stage is Vichara Samprajñata. We've studied this in Sutra 17 and 16, which is again followed by Asamprajñata. Similarly with Ananda and Asmita. So he's saying each of those four stages that we have studied, okay, Vitarka, Vichara, Ananda and Asmita, all have a Samprajñata stage and an Asamprajñata stage. Okay. And in this sutra, virāma means stopping, pratyaya means content of the mind. So our consciousness has something to dwell on during concentration. Typically this is mantra, it can even be just om, it can be so pratyaya is the support for the mind. So when people say that God is formless and whatever, God may not have a form, is what Swami Satyananda says, but the mind needs a form to be able to rest on something. The difference between Samprajñata and Asamprajñata is made clear by Patanjali. So in Asamprajñata Samadhi, there is no awareness of any symbol. This is virāma-pratyaya, that is the cessation of the support. So mere absence of awareness of a symbol or a support does not make it asampragnata. Asampragnata, it has to be a dynamic state of consciousness. And this state or laya which comes between vitarka, vichara, ananda and asmita is not free from samskaras. So consciousness, he says, is not static here. Samskara is present, and when samskara is completely finished, consciousness is completely dissolved, and that state becomes nirbija because there is no need of consciousness. It is without seed at all. So asampragnata has two distinct characteristics. One is the dropping of pratyaya, that is the cause or the content of the mind, the support, and the presence of samskara. Both of these are present in asampragnata. So he says, as one practices, one may go from vitarka to vichara to ananda to asmita, but it is important to know that as one steps into vitarka, the personal conscious willpower stops functioning and the entire operation is held by samskara, the dynamic consciousness which carries the aspirant on. This is what brings a person back to dhyana, dharana or vikalpa. So samskara is the seed of consciousness that survives. I did another video on samskara which I will link to in the description below. Please do also listen to that. So samskara is the seed of consciousness that survives up to the state of asampragnata samadhi. After that, it comes to an end, giving rise to nirbija samadhi. Nirbija is not a state at all. It is devoid of consciousness. It is devoid of awareness. In yoga, consciousness is awareness and vibration, and nirbija has no awareness and no vibration. It is just complete stillness. So he says that people who only know about samadhi or the ashtanga intellectually and they don't actually practice, they think that in the end samskara is ultimately dropped, but this is not so. Consciousness of the object, he says, does not change completely. It only changes layers of our past experiences. We experience the symbol through these, but when they are dissolved through practice, the object can be clearly seen. This is what happens when an aspirant passes from vitarka to vichara. So in dharana, the object appears as a formulated pattern of gross consciousness. In vitarka, there is a supramental pattern of consciousness. In vichara, there is contemplative pattern, and in ananda, it is the bliss pattern. But pratyaya remains till the end. It only drops intermittently, and when it drops in this asampragnata stage, it is called virāma-pratyaya, without support or without cause. In asampragnata, it drops, but it drops temporarily and it reappears in another state. So it might appear in the ananda state, it might appear in the vichara state. So asampragnata samadhi is not a permanent state. It is only an intermediate state in which the consciousness is trying to transcend into a different plane. It is a transient period. So he says that most of us do experience vitarka and asampragnata states, but they are not stabilized, they fluctuate. So he says, therefore, in our practice, we should never give up the object or the symbol of meditation. Also, because it's, as the other gurus also explain, he doesn't go into too much detail, it's dangerous because from an asampragnata state, you can either fall back to the gross state or you can get stuck there. Okay. So Swami Vivekananda says there's another samadhi which is attained by the constant practice of cessation of all mental activity, in which the chitta retains only the unmanifested impressions. This is the perfect superconsciousness, asampragnata samadhi. The state which gives us freedom. The first state does not give us freedom. Sampragnata, Swami Vivekananda says, does not give us freedom, and it does not liberate. A man may attain all his powers and may yet fall again. There is no safeguard until the soul goes beyond nature and conscious concentration. Its method is to hold the mind as the object and strike down any thought that comes into the mind, thus making it entirely a vacuum. And he says when we can attain this, we attain liberation. So Swami Vivekananda says that when persons without training try to make the mind vacant, they cover it in tamas and it becomes dull, stupid and ignorant. And this leads them to think that they are attaining a vacuum of the mind. We don't want a vacuum in which we are unaware. Okay, so when it's not just the fact of vacuum, it's not just the fact of absence of thought. So when asampragnata is reached, super consciousness, the samadhi becomes seedless. It is that sort of concentration where there is Consciousness, when the mind has succeeded in quelling the waves in chitta and holding them down, however, there are still tendencies or samskaras which will become waves again when the time comes. When all these tendencies have become destroyed, then it becomes seedless. So Swami Vivekananda also says this is not nirbija, this is sabija. What we call knowledge is a lower state. And he says the lower vibration of light is darkness, the highest vibration of light is also darkness. But this is, one is darkness and the other is very intense, is a blinding intense light. So knowledge itself is a manufactured something of a combination, it's not a reality. So what is the result of this practice of this higher concentration? All old tendencies of restlessness and dullness will be destroyed, as well as tendencies of goodness too, like melting precious metals and alloys and all of that. To purify them, everything gets burnt up. It is not that good remains and evil is gone. So he says that the soul becomes omnipotent by giving up everything, all states. It is not the soul that becomes omnipotent is not one that is clinging to the good state. As we sometimes say, all my negatives should go, only my good should remain. That is not the case. Everything should go. Okay? And he says that sage Kapila explains that there are many souls who, though they reach perfection, cannot perfectly renounce their powers, and so their minds for a time merge with nature to re-emerge as its masters. These are known as Prakriti Laya, which is explained in the next sutra. But basically what he's saying is why this asampragnata stage is difficult and a little dangerous is people keep falling off it, because you get very enamored by who you are becoming. You want to feel good. If there is still that clinging even to good, you can fall back. Okay. So BKS Iyengar says the void arising in these experiences is another samadhi. Hidden impressions lie dormant but spring up during moments of awareness, creating fluctuations and disturbing the purity of the consciousness. So Patanjali mentions, BKS Iyengar in fact says this is not even asampragnata. He says this is another state of samadhi. And he says this state exists between sabija and nirbija. So it is experienced with the cessation of all functions of the brain, leaving behind only the residual merits or samskaras of good practices. In this state, one is free from passions, desires and appetites. The word used for this state is virāma-pratyaya. In it, the sadhaka rests in a highly evolved state in which the intelligence is still. And he gives the example of, those few moments before you're falling asleep where there is the stillness. It's like a river joining the sea. And he says this happens when we lose the feeling of I. It's a state of suspended animation. So in sampragnata samadhi, intelligence dissolves but the sense of self remains. Samskaras remain. Fluctuations cease. Virāma-pratyaya, he says, becomes a plateau from which we may climb a spiritual ladder. It is a transitional state. He says you have to be very careful that stagnation doesn't set in. One should intensify the sadhana in order to reach nirbija samadhi. So he explains why it's a precarious state. People can fall from it. People who fall, he says, are called by Lord Krishna as bhrashta yogis. It's a state in which the sadhaka may be bound forever, or it can uplift him. You can fall, you can be stuck, or you can be uplifted in this state. So in order not to get stuck, you have to redouble your efforts through upaya-pratyaya, which is skillful means. So he says Patanjali clearly uses the word sampragnata for the state of samadhi reached through vitarka, vichara, ananda and asmita. In this sutra, he explains a deliberate maintenance of a thought-free state of consciousness. Hence, he uses anyaḥ, other samadhi, and he says it is not a sampragnata. So, as you can see, Maharishi Ved Vyasa calls it nirbija. Swami Satyananda says this is virāma-pratyaya, it is asampragnata, and it is in sabija. And BKS Iyengar says it is not a sampragnata. It is not nirbija, nor is it sabija. It is an in-between state known as virāma-pratyaya, which is why Patanjali calls it the other samadhi. Osho. So Osho says that in its asampragnata samadhi, there is a cessation of all mental activity and the mind only retains unmanifested impressions. So samprajñata is the first step, right reasoning, reflection, state of bliss, glimpse of bliss, feeling of amness, pure simple existence without any ego in it. This leads to a samprajñata. So the first is, it has the feeling of self. When the feeling of self is gone, it becomes a samprajñata. So the first is purity, the second is disappearance. And the example he gives is that when you say I am pure, it is still impure because the I is still in it. So when even that feeling has gone, okay, then you are reaching a samprajñata. So the disappearance of impurity is samprajñata. Disappearance of the purity also is a samprajñata. A samprajñata does not, neither has, as Swami Vivekananda says, it's not just the bad but also the good has to disappear. So even the purity has to disappear. There is a cessation of all mental activity. Thoughts disappear in the first state. In the second state, thinking also disappears. So in asamprajñata samadhi, there is a cessation of all activity and the mind only retains unmanifested impressions. But still, it is not the goal. Because what will happen to all the samskaras that you have collected in the past through all your lives in which you have acted and reacted? Okay, there's a certain collection of seeds within the mind. So the conscious mind has become pure, and the conscious mind has dropped even the activity of purity. But the unconscious is vast, and there you carry all the seeds. Asamprajñata samadhi is still sabija with seeds. When they disappear, when the soil is absolutely pure, when nothing can arise out of it, then there is no birth and there is no death. Then the whole wheel, he says, stops. And dropping out of society won't help unless you drop out of the wheel. So when you and there are so BKS Iyengar and Osho also both talk about how there are, but that comes more in the next sutra, there are people who have attained these states of nirvija and still remain in society to help others, like Sri Aurobindo and Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, and people who have reached the nirvija state but who retain their conscious manifestations in order to help others. Okay. So Barbara Stoller-Miller says, beyond this is a state where only subliminal impressions remain from the practice of stopping thought. On subsequent levels, cessation involves hyperconscious processes in which every modification of thought is eliminated and only subliminal impressions of past experience remain. These are samskaras, and these are the residue left on the mind by thoughts, actions, reactions to past stimuli. These are forgotten and lie latent in the subconscious mind and will eventually ripen and set up new mental processes. So in order to quiet the thought process completely, one would have to clear the mind of all impressions. Since this is very difficult, Patanjali offers various ways of controlling their formation and using their power. I hope this helped. Please leave comments, questions, and please do come back tomorrow for Sutra 19. Do hit subscribe. Thank you.